we'll get started. I'll just do a little intro for those of you who don't know Martin. This is Martin SFP Bryant, and I don't know what the SFP stands for, but I'm assuming it might be some kind of like lengthy Catholic middle name. So that was my bad.
It's not actually. No, I'll explain in a moment.
Okay, fantastic. So Martin, for everyone, thanks everyone for joining. Martin is a speaker, writer, and educator in the fields of tech and media. Also the founder of Big Revolution, which is not only a consultancy focused on language to help startups and growth stage tech and media firms grow, but also the producer of a daily newsletter, which has all things tech in it. And if you don't subscribe, I'd say it's definitely worth subscribing if you want to know what's going on in the tech world. So today, Martin is going to talk to us about one-pagers and the art of brevity. And I think with that, I'll hand over to you, Martin.
Okay, thank you. Yes, So one pagers, the art of brevity, and so just a little introduction to myself. Martin SFP Bryant. The reason I've got SFP in my name is that I share my name, my full name, including my middle name, with Australia's most notorious mass murderer, which means Googling me is not a fun experience, and I kind of put up with it for years, and people would get into when I started a new job, someone would always get in touch and say, you do realize you've hired a murderer? And then I get puzzled looks from my bosses, and they're like, no, don't be silly, no that's not me. So then I thought, as an act of personal SEO enhancement, I'd start referring to myself professionally as Martin SFP Bryant, because my Twitter handle is Martin SFP, because years ago, I used to make music under the name The Starfighter Pilot. So it stands for Starfighter Pilot. Nothing Catholic about it, or maybe I should make up some serious names for those initials. But it was a great SEO hack, because it immediately meant that whenever anyone Googles me, I actually come up, rather than me being blended with a murderer. In fact, Microsoft Bing actually did very recently, if you Googled Martin Bryant, it would have a picture of the murderer with my LinkedIn details and Facebook account underneath it, connected to him. Something needed to be done. But anyway, yes, Olivia introduced what I do. My background is as a tech journalist. I spent a long time working at the Next Web, where I was editor-in-chief there, and I wrote about tech companies, about startups. Loved writing about startups. And one thing I found was when I discovered a new startup, I was writing the first article about them. Sometimes I'd get the founders get in touch with me afterwards and say, oh, by the way you described me in that article is how I've started describing myself to investors and to customers and things. And I thought, okay. So then I started, after some time working at Tech North, I started Big Revolution, which is helping tech companies with their communications, with the way they describe themselves, creating one-pagers, pitch documents, that kind of thing, really helping them communicate their proposition. And it's a lot of fun. So we're going to talk a big focus today on brevity, and I really genuinely think that brevity is beautiful. I was talking to a new client this morning, and I was very glad that they were very much aligned with me on this, because they'd worked with people before who insisted that quality had to mean length, and so they had a marketing department that would create these lengthy tomes as kind of case studies and things, but they were completely impenetrable, and nobody is going to read them. And we agreed that actually, for that kind of thing, something short and snappy that gets everything across in fewer words is far more impactful than writing the equivalent of the Bible or whatever about a topic. And these days, brevity is just really, really important, as people don't have as much time, or if they've got more time, then they've got a million other things they could be doing. So respecting your audience's time is hugely important. A great example of this is Axios. If you've never looked at Axios before, they're an American news organization launched a few years ago, and they have a mantra of smart brevity. And this is an example of it here. So this is an article from a few weeks ago about the man set to become Japan's new prime minister. And what they do is they respect their readers' time. So rather than write a 400-word piece explaining the full context of why he's set to be the new prime minister, who he is, all of that kind of stuff, they just have 2 paragraphs that give you the details that you as a busy person need to know. He was elected in Tokyo as the new head of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party in a landslide win on Monday, and then why it matters. So really respecting your time, saying, let's cut everything else out. This is why it's important that we're telling you this right now. He's poised to replace Shinzo Abe as prime minister of the world's largest economy after winning a majority of the votes. And then you can go deeper, but even the deeper version of the article with more detail is less than a minute long. So before you click that link, they've told you how long it will take you to read the rest of the article. So that's what I think is it's a great example of smart brevity, because let's face it, if you wanted to know more about this guy, you could look him up on Wikipedia. You could do a Google News search if you really wanted to know more. So then by just telling you this is who he is and why it's important, that's enough. So with that in mind, let's talk about one-pagers then. So I think it's probably best to start with what is a one-pager. We've got it's basically a brief, compelling introduction to your company. Now the content can vary by audience. I'm working with a company at the moment, and we'll actually be producing a bunch of different one-pagers for different audiences, because they have all sorts of different partners, and they're looking for investors and all that kind of thing. And for each of them, the messaging needs to be slightly tweaked because they're saying different things. Think Cliff's Notes, but even shorter. So Cliff's Notes is that that brand of books that basically, if you don't want to read the complete works of Shakespeare, you read that and it tells you everything you need to know about the complete works of Shakespeare to pass an exam about it without actually having to read it. So a good way of looking at this is how you it's like a calling card, essentially. It's like, this is the essential information, and it can be very hard to boil that down, and we'll get to that, especially if you're a founder immersed in your company. But in the end, this is what an investor will see before they see your pitch deck. So it has to be kind of tantalizing and also informative. So why do you need one? As I was saying, an introduction before an investor sees your deck. So maybe you're looking for investors and you talk to someone and they say, oh, you should really talk to this investor. But if you send them your deck initially, that's a lot. A deck can go on for, many slides with lots and lots of detail. And if you're just wanting to know if the investor's interested in learning more, just a one-pager is enough to tantalize them enough to go, okay, great, I want to see your deck, or let's have a meeting, or whatever. It's a tease to get them interested. I also think it's important to write one before you need one, because as well as communicating to external audiences something about you, a one-pager can be a really good way of locking into your own head and into the heads of everyone in your company exactly what it is you do and why, because you know what it is you do and why, but you don't necessarily communicate it in a way that makes a lot of sense to everyone else, because you're so immersed in it, especially if you're a founder and you're juggling all the different perspectives on your company, all the different things you have to do. You're seeing it from the inside. You're seeing a big mess of tangled wires that need to be straightened out, when on the outside, what everyone sees is a box that's probably got some wires in it. And you want to present the box with the wires in it, rather than here's a scramble of wires messed up inside a box, which is probably how you see your company, because that's how founders are. So yeah, it gives you a great opportunity to think about your company from the outside, and so it can help to get external perspectives on your company, but as part of it. But I would certainly say that just taking the time to think through what it is you do and to communicate, how to communicate that in a straightforward way that makes sense to the outside, can be hugely important. One company I worked with recently, they actually paused the work we were doing because they realized, once I'd done a very basic draft one-pager, they realized that they didn't actually have a clear idea of what the company did themselves. I'd taken what they told me over multiple slide decks and a couple of calls and turned it into this one-pager for them. But then they were like, oh, yeah, we just realized that we're not actually clear on what our business model is. And so they spent the summer then figuring out what they wanted to be. So it was a valuable exercise to go through to put it down when they realized that it wasn't what they wanted it to be. And that wasn't my fault. That was the fact that they had never communicated outside of their own heads what it is they were doing. And I don't think even they were aligned within the founding team about what they were supposed to be doing. So what should you include in a one-pager? Obvious ones like company name, contact details, micropitch. I'll come to that later. That's something you won't see on many lists of things to include on a one-pager, but you might see it on there without it being called a micropitch. Problem and solution. Make sure the problems that you list actually line up to the solutions. I've seen people who list a load of problems and the solutions aren't the solutions to the problems, which sounds illogical, but I've seen it done. Your business model, your competitors. Very important to be honest about your competitors, because investors, journalists, everyone wants you to be honest about it, because otherwise it's not clear if you're actually clear about the competitive market you're in, if you're deluded or you're just being secretive. So just being open and honest shows that you're ready for the challenge. Why now and why you? Traction, so having a list of some of the milestones you've reached already, some of your achievements already, your roadmap for the future, and how much you want to raise. And this one has surprised some people in the past when I've told them this. I go, we've got to put down exactly how much we want to raise. Yes, it's always a good idea, because, well, first of all, it shows you know where you're going with your company, and secondly, it could be either a red flag to investors that you don't know where you're going with your company, or it could be an enticement to slightly more exploitative investors to take you for a ride. So yeah, there's quite a lot to pack in, but we'll look at how to do that. So I mentioned a micro pitch. And this is essentially my name for one or two sentences that capture the essence of your company. They work in it works in any context, whoever you're speaking to. So it's easy to remember and easy to say. An example of this is when I used to work at Tech North, we didn't have a simple one or two sentence description of what Tech North was, and I think that meant that a lot of people had different ideas about what Tech North was supposed to be doing, and so it meant that people said, is Tech North doing enough for the north of England, or it's not doing what I thought it should be doing. And I think that the website would explain what Tech North did in a lot of detail, but just a simple snappy, this is what we're here, this is what we do and why, is incredibly good at focusing people's minds, both internally and externally. So when I joined and I saw we didn't have this, I thought, well, I've got to go out to networking events and all this kind of thing, and I've got to, people will ask me what I do and what Tech North does. So I came up with Tech North helps support and develop the tech sector in the north of England. Promote and develop the tech sector in the north of England. And so that was just a really simple thing. It didn't go into a lot of detail about all the ways we do that, but it gave an overview of the mission and gave a flavor of the kinds of support that we give. Promotion, it's a lot of marketing and blowing the trumpet for the region, but also develop, so helping to develop the companies there. So it was just a simple thing I could say off the top of my head to anyone in any context, and it was the starter for a bigger conversation. And so this can also work on as a brief introduction at the top, top level, this is what we do and why, before you get into these are the problems, these are the solutions, this is how we're doing so far, all of that kind of stuff. Just having that sentence or two sentences at the top quickly sets the context and helps the reader understand what they're going to see next. So this not the top bit, but the second bit here is well, the whole thing here is taken from Stripe's old website design. They recently changed it. But I think the top bit is interesting. It's like it's a mission, right? It's a mission statement rather than a micro pitch. But the second bit is similar to what I mean by a micro pitch. Stripe is a technology company that builds economic infrastructure for the internet. Businesses of every size, from new startups to public companies, use our software to accept payments and manage their businesses online. So it's quite wordy to say off the top of your head, but you get the idea that you could probably refine that into something ever so slightly shorter that you could snappily say to anyone and they would understand very easily, without going into all of the different products that Stripe offers and all the ways it works and all that kind of thing. Their micro pitch when they first launched, and I agree, years and years ago, how excited people were in Ireland when they first started, and these Irish guys had started this company, and it was 2 lines of code to add payment to any website or something along those lines, and that people could easily get that. And they've obviously evolved since then, but they've always been very good at communicating simply what it is they do in just a sentence or two. This is one I made up for Facebook. Obviously, Facebook these days is absolutely enormous and does a million different things. How would you boil that down into a sentence? It could be something like this. Facebook offers social apps and services that connect you with your friends and bring the world together. So that takes in everything from their Facebook main app to Instagram to Messenger to WhatsApp to their VR technologies and everything else. Obviously, if you were going to go into more depth, you'd say Facebook is actually an advertising company. But as a top level description, that's a pretty good one. Another good one, Glassdoor for VCs. Your micro pitch can actually be really, really short if your proposition and what you're offering is so straightforward that it can be communicated in 3 words. Why not? So this is a Manchester-based service called Landscape that's going to be launching soon as a kind of reviews service. It's for founders to review investors, and so it should be getting quite a lot of press attention soon because it's a really interesting idea. It's already had a bit of press attention, in fact, and part of the reason it's got press attention without going and seeking it is because Glassdoor for VCs makes instant sense. Now, I don't think they can really launch on their web. When they launch officially, they probably get a letter from Glassdoor's lawyers if they had Glassdoor for VCs on the website when they launch officially. But as an informal descriptor to send to investors, or I doubt they're going to get investment from the investors who are reviewing them, who they're being reviewed on there. But for a basic introduction to the company, kind of informally in emails and things, Glassdoor for VCs just works, doesn't it? And as a way for journalists to describe them. So how do you get to be brief? How he say be brief, but actually, especially when you're in the weeds of a company, being brief can be difficult because you see a billion different dimensions to your company when someone from the outside probably sees 1 or 2 or 3. Inside, you're seeing everything from the marketing strategy to the product development to partner relationships to investor relationships to all hiring the right people. You're seeing this company, and so it's totally understandable why many founders can find it difficult to then boil that down to a short amount of text. The best way to be brief is to start off by not being brief, to write at length. Just write down everything about your company. So this is, for example, a micro pitch. Just write down everything about your company. It might be 2 paragraphs. It might be 3 pages of A4. Just however much you think is the important stuff to get through about your company, and then boil it down, by which I mean look through it and start cutting stuff out. You think, well, actually, on reflection, having written this, gone away for a little while, come back to the text, if I'm communicating with, say, an investor, they don't need to know this first. I can tell them this later. This is not the top level information. Scrub that out, and keep on doing that, boiling it down again and again until you've got something that is to the length you need. take a look at an example of this. So this is a lengthier description of Facebook. Facebook is a website and app that gives you a feed showing what your friends, co-workers, and favorite brands are doing through features like photo and video sharing, private messaging, location check-ins, and groups that help you expand your network and learn new things. We allow businesses and organizations to communicate with exactly the right people through highly granular targeting. So that doesn't cover everything about Facebook, but it gives you a good feel for the company, doesn't it? It's got some of the features in there. It's got something about the business model, saying a website and app, all this kind of stuff. So on first look, maybe you're Mark Zuckerberg and you're pitching Facebook. That seems fair enough. So how do you boil that down to something a little bit more digestible in a sentence or two? Well, your first pass might be striking through a couple of these things. So here I've taken out gives you a feed showing. So Facebook is it originally said Facebook is a website and app that gives you a feed showing what your friends, coworkers, and favorite brands are doing. Is it necessary to say gives you a feed showing? Shows basically says the same thing, just without the detail that it's in a feed. Saying it's in a feed is probably second level information or lower. And if this was for a one pager, for example, you could easily have a screenshot of a phone running Facebook with a feed on it, and then people would know the information is presented in a feed without you having to use words to say it. Then I've struck through a list of the features. So, features like photo, video sharing, private messaging, location check-ins, and groups. That now it might seem like a good idea to say some of the features, but again, that's probably second level information below just what you do and why. You're still explaining what you do, you just in less detail. So you take that out, a bit of a grammatical change there just to make it make sense. And then you end up with Facebook as a website and app that shows what your friends, co-workers, and favorite brands are doing, helping you expand your network and learn new things. And we allow businesses and organizations to communicate with exactly the right people through highly granular targeting. So we've boiled it down there a bit, but let's boil it down again. So this time, I always recommend you go away for a while and come back later, because you'll see it with fresh eyes, and you've given your brain a bit of a rest about it, and you're seeing it again. So this time I've taken out is a website and app that, because again, if this is for a one pager, for example, you can show Facebook on a phone, so people know it's an app. Or you could use one of those templates that have like a laptop and a phone next to each other, and you slot the screenshots in, so people know it's a website and an app. It doesn't need to be said in words. And again, you're kind of getting into more detail than you need at a top level to create a slick, simple impression of what it is your company does. And then I've changed, we allow businesses and organizations to communicate with exactly the right people through highly granular targeting. Allow I've changed to let, just because it's 2 characters fewer, but it's also it's more empowering. Allowing is like giving permission, whereas let is more, it's still giving permission in a way, but it feels a bit more empowering, doesn't it, than allowing. Allowing has a sense of school teachers about it, whereas let, it kind of it has more of a sense of empowering about it, empowering the user. You could say empowering, but that's more characters, and it's a little bit kind of almost feels a bit cliche-esque to say empower. So I went with let. Simple language is often the best, rather than going for buzzwords and things. Businesses, I've taken out and organizations to communicate with. Took out and organizations because, again, it's just cutting down the length. And also, my thinking there is, if you're saying businesses and organizations, if I'm an investor, I'm thinking, businesses and organizations, that means, are they spending their time catering to non-profits who won't pay very much? Now, you might very well be doing that, and you might think that's very important, but just as an introduction to an investor, if you say businesses, that kind of includes organizations, and it signifies, it implies people who are willing to pay more money than organizations who maybe don't have as much money, if you're including kind of non-profits, charities and things like that. And then to communicate with, just change it to reach, because it's a shorter way of saying the same thing. Always look for ways of look for where you've used 4 words where 1 word would do. I think a lot of us do that. I do it as well, and then you go back and you change it, because you realize actually saying something in lots of words is kind of something you've absorbed over the years through kind of formal business speak, or just the way people colloquially talk, when actually, if you're communicating clearly, it's often a lot better just to use fewer words and just pick the right words. So anyway, then you end up with Facebook shows what your friends, co-workers and favorite brands are doing, helping you expand your network and learn new things. And we let businesses reach exactly the right people through highly granular targeting. I'd say this could probably be refined further down. The starting a sentence with "and" is, although English teachers from years gone by would probably have frowned at that, is perfectly acceptable. But it looks maybe slightly messy. So I maybe would look for a slightly different way of running on that first sentence into the second. But I think as a first pass of creating something short and snappy that describes Facebook in a very concise way, I think we've boiled that text down quite well. And yeah, that just shows you how what we've ended up with is roughly half the length of the original and says the same thing, just with fewer details and cleaner language. So I just want to give a note on design, because there are 2 sides to creating a good one-pager. The one side is the language and choosing the right language and saying the right things with words. The second part is the design, because you don't need to be flashy. You don't need to be super, you don't need to spend years thinking of some amazing new design that's going to blow everything else, every other one-pager ever, out of the water. It's a functional document. It doesn't need to be artistically amazing. It just needs to look like you care enough to have spent a little bit of time on making it look like more than just text on a page. So these are a couple of examples that are out there on the internet. If you search for one-pager examples, these come up. Surprisingly, there aren't as many as you'd think out there of good examples, and I think a lot of it is because a lot of people who create these one-pagers then like to keep them to themselves. And I have seen some good ones that I can't share, unfortunately, because, like I say, they're generally shared in confidence to a small number of people. But this gives you an idea, at least, of how you can present information. So multiple columns, images instead of words. So like I was saying, website and app. For this My Awesome Startup on the left, they've got a template here. You can get these templates online easily of different devices that you can obviously then just slot your product onto to give an idea of what it looks like. That's one form of visual shorthand. Other things are things like charts. So they've got a chart here showing their funding goals, and the percentage they intend to spend different amounts of the money on. The one on the right has a bar chart of yearly revenue, for example. But the main thing you see is that the text is lots of very short snippets, bullet points, simple, easy to read. And then, using some graphics on there where it adds not only a bit of visual appeal, but also has a functional use as well. And it helps break up the text as well. And it's definitely worth having a logo on there, some kind of visual identity for your company, assuming you have one. Something better than just your name in a default font. So this is a Techstars template. The accelerator Techstars has offered over the years to startups. And again, I mean, this is an example of things Techstars recommends you put on there. It's similar to the list I gave. It's the terminology is slightly different. They've got technology optional, describe any proprietary tech. That's obviously something you would do if you have created something that's patentable, for example, and not every company will. So it's just a case of making sure that you've got the information on there that that shows everything about why you're a hot investment proposition. So Olivia sent me through a few examples, a couple of examples, and so these are Nova examples. So Hygiene as an example here. And I thought overall the information in this one, it's the right kind of information. I think in terms of just making it more visually appealing, I think think about how you can maybe present a graph instead of the funding requirements. Maybe I think if you can work in founder pictures, that can be useful. And I also think having a micro, the reason for founder pictures, by the way, is it just makes you look presentable. The investor then knows who they're going to be dealing with. They don't have to be big. They can be little thumbnails, but just an idea of what you look like gives the investor an idea of who they're going to be talking to, and it can help in terms of just humanizing that company beyond like an email introduction or something. So that can be quite a good touch. The other thing this doesn't have is a micro pitch, so it kind of goes straight into the problem and the product. But is there a way of describing the innovative, automatic, and unobtrusive AHMS in a kind of clear 1 or 2 sentences that make sense to somebody who isn't au fait with hygiene health and healthcare? So that would probably be a good thing to have at the top above everything else. Similar with Menu Guru, really. That kind of something to focus at the top and describe Menu Guru in a sentence, because otherwise when I read it, I'm going straight to the problem. Also, I'd say with this one, and it might be true of the other one actually, is you've got the one column downside, next column, but the first column follows straight onto the, at the bottom, funding to date and milestones achieved. You've got your investment amount on there, and then you have to go back up to the right to start reading off the bottom of the first column. So layout is probably important to make sure that you might, for example, have the problem and the product next to each other. So I read about the problem and then I see the product on the right, and then maybe there's a line underneath to clearly denote that there are other sections underneath to read. So just thinking about layout to make sure it scans easily for a reader who isn't familiar with the product. And yes, absolutely, I think it needs some kind of micro pitch just to help frame who you are and what you're doing. So what makes a great investor one-pager? And this is kind of pulling together what we've been talking about there. It needs to be compelling, so it needs to be factual. It definitely needs to be factual. So no, I say zero fluff. No kind of stretching the truth. No. Because in the end, if it's an investor, if they want to invest, then they're presumably going to be doing some due diligence, and so stretching the truth probably isn't a good idea. But don't make it dry. So at least make it just a little bit tantalizing, so they want to know more. So I think that micro pitch is a really important one for being a top level framing that then leads into everything else. So then they can go, okay, right. So that now my head's in the space for the kind of thing they're going to be talking about here, and then okay, yeah. So this is the problem and this is the solution, etc. And a clean, attractive design. As I say, it doesn't need to be a work of art, an innovative piece of graphic design. It just needs to be functional, but look clean and attractive. Okay, exercise time. Now, I don't know if anyone's done this, but Olivia sent around an email about an exercise that I've done with this talk in the past, where if you have written down a description of your company in, say, a paragraph or two, just using that technique of boiling the text down to turn it into a micropitch, and just spending about 5 minutes on that, and then going through with anyone who wants to share theirs, to see what we've produced. I'm looking at my full screen here, so I can't see what people are saying or thinking about this. But has anyone done this? Did anyone come with a paragraph?
Hello, it's Richard Nurse here from PitchPath. I have actually created a paragraph. It's quite a wordy one though, so it's not really, and it does need cutting down quite a bit.
Yeah. So has anyone else? Because if it's just you, I don't think it's very fair that we just sit around. Because normally we'd sit around and wait for people to do it, and then we'd maybe go through a couple of examples afterwards. But if it is just you who's done it, then we won't just sit here and
I've got one as well.
Twiddle our thumbs while you do that and put you under pressure. No, okay, that's fine. That's no problem at all. But it's a good, maybe then a good exercise to do, and hopefully you've seen from that why that's valuable and why that can be a useful process. Just a quick note before we go into some Q&A and things about what I can do for you. So these are some of the services I offer. So proposition and narrative development, copywriting, content development. So I'm just talking with a company today, quite a larger company that really want to ramp up their content. So working with them to create a cadence and a format for their content that hopefully then somebody else can pick up the mantle for daily content generation down the line, and also PR and media relations as well. So I work with startups to announce funding rounds to TechCrunch and Tech.eu and people like that as well. So yeah, do we have any questions based on what I've been talking about?
One from me, Martin, and thanks for the talk. I think we've definitely, got the message about boiling it down and focusing on design and layout was a good one, because I know that that's something we've probably at Nova not been too focused on in previous times. I'm kind of interested to know, what's the kind of best and worst one pages you've ever seen and why? Maybe just it'd be interesting to hear a little bit from you about that.
Okay, so well, I'd say what's worst. I mean, nothing stands out as the absolute singular best one ever. I think I've given some ideas of what stands out as best practice. I'd say some of the worst ones tend to use on a design front. They tend to look really dated. So they've thought about the design, but they've not actually spoken to a designer or looked at any modern design in the last 20 years, and it just looks awful. And I think a lot of the time they look at the problem, they communicate the problem they're solving from their own perspective, which is you need to think about the relevance to the rest of the world rather than the relevance to how you see it. And I'm trying to think of how best to explain that. So, for example, I was talking to someone who does like AI facial changes for the cosmetic industry. So so you can see what you'd look like with a nose job, for example, and they take a picture of you and automatically transform your nose to what it would look like, and things like that. And the way they were presenting it was completely missing the way they were talking about it, they had a micro pitch and they had like a little description about why it was important and everything like that. But the way they were talking about it was not really, like, the problems and the solutions weren't connected. So they were talking about, these are the problems that the industry faces. These are our solutions, but they weren't the solutions to the problems. So it's like, well, there's no logic there. And they were talking about, they were presenting figures that were really niche for small markets, the market in this particular country, which was a tiny market, presents this data, rather than thinking about an investor who is probably going to want to look at you going beyond, some small Eastern European country, for example, and look out to the world. So not thinking about what an investor would want to think about, and thinking more about things from some kind of worldview you've built up yourself in your head over time. So really, I suppose the point is thinking about your target audience far more than how you think about your company. And I think that in the end, that's down to not ever looking outside your company for any kind of verification the way you see your company is the way your company should be presented. And I think that, again, that's down to just the fact that a lot of founders, they build their company and they're very immersed in their world, they're experts in their field, and they know there's a gap in the market for what they're doing, but they only ever think about it on their terms and their as they see it. Even if they're thinking about the needs of the customer, they see the needs of the customer through their eyes rather than the way the customer sees their needs. So I think in the end, it's all about talking to customers, or talking to existing investors, talking to friends, talking to people outside of your company, to make sure the way you're communicating your company makes sense to how they see your company. And if they don't already know what your company does, it actually communicates what your company does, because I suppose the worst one pages just fail to communicate anything other than dry business facts, which in the end don't sell the company or set the company in any kind of context at all. So a long rambling answer, but hopefully answering it in a way.
A lesson in how not to have the art of brevity, but thank you for the answer. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hi, Martin. Ian Dixon here. Just a very quick question, if I may. Say, for example, we've scripted a really good one-pager. We've sent it off to various VCs or people like that. How long do you think they actually give themselves to read these, given that a VC could be receiving potentially hundreds of these? How long do you think these get in front of the right eyes?
I mean, it's difficult to answer that, because last year I did a documentary series about the VC industry called Making Sense of VC. It's only a three-parter, three episodes, about 45 minutes each. Look it up on your favorite podcast app, because if you want to kind of hear what a lot of VCs say about the VC industry. But through talking to them and through talking to their experiences of dealing with startups, it really varies. And I'm sorry I can't give a simple answer for that. But some VCs will be very responsive and will get back to everyone really quickly. And if they're a big company, maybe they've got associates who look through all of these and very quickly send the right ones up to the right people, or at least get back to you and say they want to know more. Some small boutique VC firms can be very responsive as well. They might be very committed to getting back to everyone. Some may never get back to you. They might not read it. They're humans. Some are very organized. Like, some people have 1 million unread emails, and some people have inbox 0 every day. And they're both productive people in their own way, and they both get results in their jobs, but they just have different approaches to things. So I'm afraid I can't really give you an answer on that, because it'll depend on the kind of person they are and how they treat their inbound interests, but also just how busy they are on a particular week, how busy they are on a particular month. There's no hard and fast answer to that, unfortunately. All I will say is that a one-pager is more likely to be read in and understood than just sending a deck, especially if it's with very little context. You know, and on that point, a warm introduction to a VC before sending a one-pager, or getting the person who knows the VC to send the one-pager and along with an offer of an introduction, that's more likely to get results than just sending in a one-pager cold with no previous context or contact.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. I hope that's been useful.
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin. Really appreciate the talk. And yeah, thanks for all the inputs. I'm sure it'll be useful.
Excellent, no problem at all. Just a moment. There we go. I can see you again now. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Well, do if anyone wants to drop me a line, please feel free. And yeah, it's been great to talk to you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.